Alright guys, welcome back to the channel. In today's video, we're going to discuss the difference between bugging out versus bugging in or sheltering in place. And we're going to discuss three key aspects of why sheltering in place is going to be your first and best option in most scenarios. So let's jump in. Alright guys, so as I said in this video, we're going to jump in and discuss just a little bit about the difference between bugging out versus bugging in or sheltering in place, and why we want to consider those as we determine based on the scenario what we want to do. So first off, again, there are going to be scenarios where bugging out is going to be an option, and it's going to be the best option. Now, with that said, I feel like sometimes in the preparedness community there's a lot of emphasis and discussions around bug out bags and 72-hour kits and those kind of things that sometimes I think that we get the wrong idea that bugging out is going to be the only option we're going to have. And I would say that 95% of the scenarios that may come across is really bugging in or sheltering in place is going to be the preferred option. So for example, the recent Ohio train derailment, where that caused chemicals to be able to spill into the air and the environment that caused families in that area to have to evacuate their home. That is a scenario definitely where having a bug out kit or a 72-hour kit is going to be important, because you want to be able to grab your gear and things to be able to sustain yourself for a couple days at minimum to be able to keep you and your family and your pets and those things safe. And so getting out as quickly as you can is going to be important. So having a kit to be able to do that is going to be key. Now, outside of some of those scenarios though, again, I would say preferred method in most cases is going to be sheltering in place. And what does a shelter in place mean? There could be lots of scenarios that sheltering in place. Could be weather, right? So we've seen over the last several years, several scenarios with weather causing people to have to shelter in place in their home, right? Where they're trapped potentially based on the snow or ice or things that have caused them to be trapped in those environments. And so sheltering in place, do you have some of those basic things in your home to sustain yourself? Again, if you've got a bug out bag or a 72-hour kit, that at least will sustain you for a couple of days. If that's all you have, that's better than nothing. But then also we talk about the idea of you should be working towards that 3-week supply of things in your home as well, be it food, water, some basic supplies and needs, some ways to be able to cook food in those kind of scenarios as well, right? So there should be really that 3 days for your bug out bag. 3 weeks should be something you should be preparing in your home with basic food and water scenario. And then ultimately getting into 3 months and longer term are the ways that you want to consider. How do I prepare myself to be able to shelter in place if necessary with the right equipment, supplies to sustain my family and I for a longer period of time? Could be 3 months or longer. So as we consider those ideas, then we want to look at why is sheltering in place our preferred option. First and foremost, I would say again, sheltering in place is going to provide you a shelter environment for you and your family to be more comfortable, right? And in any emergency scenario, the ability to be able to stay comfortable and not be able to create additional stress is going to help you and your family in those type of scenarios. So it's going to provide a shelter, it's going to provide an environment for you to be able to determine what's the next best decision or options for you and your family. Second, it's going to provide you with the most supplies of tools, food, water, those kind of things that are going to be important, again, depending on the scenario and how long that particular emergency takes place. And then lastly, of course, even though it's last, it's not least, is it provides you a good scenario for defending that location as well, whether it be defense against the storm or those things that are happening, or also defense against other scenarios that may happen based on the environment and or the scenario and how extensive it is. So as we look at bugging out or bugging in, these are things to consider, right? Bugging out, you're trying to put distance between you and the scenario or the emergency in the situation. It's going to provide you with limited gear, for just sustaining yourself with basic needs for a couple of days is really all that's going to do. So again, yes, it can be a scenario that we want to understand and be prepared for. But ultimately, sheltering in place is going to give us the most gear, the most options around food, shelter, water, defense, things like that we want to consider. And it's those things that we want to consider as we start looking at this scenario that is currently in front of us. Okay? So again, there's been those recent events within Ohio that caused the need to be able to bug out. And then there's been recent events even in more of my area in Arizona where there's a tractor trailer that overturned that caused a shelter in place. Now, one of the other things that we got to think about when it does come to shelter in place is understanding, do we have some basic gear there as well? And one of the things that we always want to consider for a shelter in place gear is having some basic plastic, okay? So some heavy, thick plastic and some duct tape. And that is really to be able to cover any windows and or vents and things where the air may be coming in from, again, a chemical spill or a scenario where we need to reduce the risk of those contaminants coming into our home. And that may be a scenario where we got to figure out, do we have a good room in our home that we can pull our family into and provide a more stable environment for us to be able to survive for several hours up to a day or more if we need be. So it's those kind of things to consider. In our home, we have a room a lot of times that we actually have basic food, water, some basic supplies and things that we keep some of this gear in. And that is a good way to be able to, in a shelter-in-place scenario where we can go into that room and be able to survive and sustain ourselves for several days if need be. As we start looking at some of the recent situations and things that are happening, I would encourage each of us to think about, do we have some basic supplies for a 72-hour kit or a bug-out bag? Because that may be a need for that. But also, do we have basic things in place for a shelter-in-place or bugging in? Do we have 3 weeks of just backup food if something happens that we could sustain us and our family in that scenario? And then build on that from 3 weeks to 3 months and so forth. It doesn't have to take a lot, but it's something you do a little bit each day to prepare you and your family for those scenarios that's going to help you and cause a greater stability and or peace of mind when those scenarios do happen. All right, guys, so thanks again for joining us for this short video. Hopefully it added value to you as you start thinking about and considering ideas of bugging out versus sheltering in place and why those scenarios are things that we want to be aware of and prepared for to the best of our ability. Now, there's not going to be any perfect answer for all scenarios, but this is really just to give you some of those ideas to think about and consider as you prepare for you and your family. Thanks again for supporting the channel. And again, please feel free to add your comments and thoughts below of things that you would consider or things that you've used or would like to have available based on those particular scenarios as well. I always appreciate learning from you guys in the things that you're doing and in how you are expanding your ideas around preparing you and your families as well. In the next video, I'm actually going to dive a little bit into some of the other additional equipment that I carry in my bug out bin. So I talked a little bit about my bug out bag, but in my bug out bins, I also have other additional equipment and gear that I carry, especially for my family and things that will make it more feasible and comfortable for us to survive and sustain ourselves for a little bit longer. Thanks again. We'll look forward to having you join us soon.